Alright, hello and welcome to a bit of a different video. Today I'm going to be doing a tier list of all the one drops in Marvel Snap. So I believe I did the math and there's 41 of them. So if I missed one, sorry, there's a lot to try and keep track of. But yeah, so basically I'm just going to be ranking them. The factors that I'm going to take into account when ranking them are how like generically good the card is in a standalone environment, and then also look at how good the card is in its specific deck type, right? So, like, example, Deadpool is in his own right not a very good card. In Destroy specifically, a very good card, a very strong piece, right? You have to be able to destroy him. If you can't destroy him, he's not a good card. He's a 1/1. So obviously both of these things need to be taken into consideration. Um, so with that being said, I've done a little bit of thinking, but not a whole lot, so you're going to get to hear my reasoning. And if this is a video style you guys like to see, please let me know, and let me know what other card archetypes you like to see. Like if you'd like to see ongoing cards, on reveal cards, 6 drops, 2 drops, 3 drops, etc. So anyway, let's just get into it. So first, this isn't in any particular order. Agent 13. So I guess I should explain the tiers. So S tier obviously is like the extremely strong cards. You should probably run this one drop pretty much whenever you can. It's an extremely versatile card as well as extremely potent in whatever decks it's in. A tier is a similar vein. It's a very good card. Might be more niche into its specific deck type, but in its specific deck type, it's extremely good, right? So, uh, like Deadpool again, a card like that where it's really good in the deck type that it's supposed to be in, but it's not. You're not using it everywhere, right? It's staying where it should be. B tier is just generically good cards. You can get away with running these one drops in their shell. They're also a good piece, maybe not a necessary piece, but a useful piece that you don't mind having. Um, then C through F tier are pretty much bad to unusable cards. Obviously, the lower you go, the worse it gets. But anything below B, I would say probably don't run the card unless you really have to for some reason. But I would say don't do it unless you're like building the deck around that card. So yeah, Agent 13, based off what I just said, he's going in the B tier. She generates a random card for you. Really good for Devil Dino collector decks and stuff like that. However, the issue is there's other cards that do a similar thing to her and do that job slightly better. Uh, an example would be Maria Hill. I'm also putting Maria Hill in the B tier. I think that she does a similar job to Agent 13, but better because it's more consistent. You know with Maria Hill that you're getting a 2 drop, right? Agent 13's random, so it could be good, could be bad. Maria Hill, you're getting a 2 drop, so if you don't have a 2 drop when you have Maria Hill in hand, you can play Maria Hill and you get it. Also, ignore that it says she's a 2/3. Her and Forge are using the old card before they got converted, so they are one drops in the current sandbox. Um, so I'm just gonna, I think, stick with this archetype of card and put in Snowguard. So Snowguard is also the same style of card as Maria Hill and Agent 13. When you play Snowguard, you add the bird and the bear to your hand. So she's immediately better than Maria Hill and Agent 13 in those Collector Devil Dino decks, where you now just added 2 cards. So that's 2 points of power to Collector. It's 4 points of power to Devil Dino if those stay in your hand. Also, Bird, even though it's a 3/3 now, still an extremely good card. The ability to shut down Limbo on turn 6 to end the game early when your opponent might not be expecting it. The fact that it pairs well with Quinjet being reduced to 2 cost. It's an extremely versatile card and it's very strong. Obviously, don't use it really outside of the collector shell a whole lot, but it's still a very good and very useful card to give you an edge when you need it. It also can let you get into locations like Sanctum Sanctorum, Luke's Bar, Death's Domain, Altar of Death. You get the list. Uh, and then Quinjet is another great card. In this archetype, obviously, having Quinjet lets you reduce the cost of all the cards that Snowguard, Maria Hill, or Agent 13 would produce, as well as other cards such as Loki and other very strong cards currently in the metagame. Uh, as a heads up, I am recording this on Monday. The patch notes have not gone live as I'm recording it. Figure I should say that now. Because I don't know if Quinjet will work with new Loki. But still a very strong card, even for random locations where you're getting a benefit, such as like Daily Bugle and other locations that give you cards. Quinjet will reduce those cards. Obviously, that's not the main way you're doing it, but it's still a nice benefit. An additional benefit is it's an ongoing card. There are, I believe, 4 ongoing one drops. So Quinjet being one of them. If you're running an ongoing deck, Quinjet is also very usable there, even though you might not be using its ability, more just the fact that it can get hit by Spectrum. Um, so moving on, Angel, I'm putting in the C tier. Once again, I should emphasize, patch notes did get leaked. Angel's supposed to be getting a buff to also fly out of your hand, not just your deck, but at the moment he only flies out of your deck. So I'm putting him in the C tier. You really don't want to use Angel ever. You can get away with using him if you are like early ladder, early collection level where you don't have other things like you don't have Deadpool, X-23, maybe you're missing Nova. So Angel's a good just power thing. You don't have to play him, right. It's a free 1 energy that you are cheating onto the board essentially. So a very good card in that sense, but it's just very inconsistent. If you ever draw him, he's a dead card. Uh, and then even just adding 2 power to the board, sometimes it's more clog than it's worth. So it's just kind of a weird card, not really that good. You wouldn't run him in anything outside of Destroy, and even in Destroy, he's not very good. Ant-Man is a very strong card. One of the probably it's the best one drop ongoing ability that we have in the game currently. He becomes a 1/4 if his location's filled. So if you're playing a very swarmy, big, like fill your board kind of deck, then Ant-Man's very good. He'll be a 1/4, which is one of the best rate one drops in the game for what would be a low activation cost in his deck. He's also good in ongoing decks where you plan on playing out a lot of things and filling your board. So he has a lot of very good niches. It's just sometimes it can be a hard ability to activate. But with the low energy cost of 1, he's still a very good card and should be probably used in a lot of decks where you are filling the board. So Bast is an interesting one, and because of that, I'm not going to place him yet because I don't know where I want to place him. Blade, I'm putting in A tier. Now that he's a more consistent discard card, he always hits the newest card you drew, the rightmost card. And he has an above rate energy to power ratio of 3 power per 1 energy. He's a very good card. You see him in almost every Black Knight deck, every discard deck, every Hela deck, because you can consistently say, there's my Infinite, let's hit him. There's my Magneto, let's hit him. And then he pairs well with Black Knight and Ghost Rider and Hela to pull those things back. You can also hit Apocalypse, obviously. It's just a very consistent card, and you can use him to fill curve extremely easily. So, like on turn 4, let's say you just pulled Apocalypse, you could play Blade Lady Sif, or let's say you pulled him on turn 4, you could Lady Sif to hit Apocalypse, then Blade to hit him again, right? You have a lot of options with Blade. It's a very strong card. He's probably used in every single discard deck. He's like a staple discard card. He's just not, you're not really using him outside of that. Like you're not using him in Cerebro 3 really, and you're not really using him in like Zoo decks typically. So that's why he's staying in the A tier and not going into the S tier. But he is probably like over here, if we were to be judging from left to right. So Bast is extremely strong, which is why it's difficult. He's an A tier for sure in my mind. I don't know if he's S tier is the issue. Right, he's extremely strong in Zoo decks. You can use him in almost every zoo deck because every zoo deck uses a 2 power card, or like they'll have 2 power typically. So it'll flip them and add a lot of power to your hand. He can easily become a 110 in a lot of games. Um, you can also pair him with bounce decks extremely well for a very similar reason. You can see him used in Cerebro 3. I think I'm talking myself into him being an S tier card. You can use him in Cerebro 3, right, to give Cerebro his own buff, Mystique her own buff, and Iron Man his own buff, which can be extremely valuable, obviously. So I think I will put Bast as the first S tier. He's an extremely useful card that is in a wide variety of decks. The issue really is the decks themselves aren't very good, and that's just generally because one drops don't really sway the tide that much. So, um, yeah, Deadpool. I'm gonna say Deadpool is an A tier card. Deadpool's extremely strong. He, I'm sure everyone who's watched this video who's ever played Marvel Snap has had the game where Deadpool is a 164, and what are you supposed to do about it? They go Deadpool Taskmaster. Like what do you do on turn 6? But obviously that takes a lot of luck. But even with that, just destroying him on repeat is cheapening death in his deck. It's adding power to Null. It's adding power to him. If you're Venoming, it's adding power to Venom. So it can just get out of control very quickly, especially when you pair him with cards like Forge and Hulkbuster, things that add power to him before you destroy him. He can just become an absolute menace. So I think in his specific deck, he's extremely strong. You're just not going to see Deadpool outside of like Deadpool dedicated destroy decks, really. It's kind of like the game plan for his deck is you either want a really big Deadpool, a free death, or a null. Basically, all the time is what you're looking for. All right, looking at Ebony Maw now. See, Ebony Maw is a very polarizing card to me. I always hate running into Ebony Maw. Can I okay. I always hate running into Ebony Maw. Ebony Maw is in like exactly one shell. It's the Shuri Red Skull deck, Sauron Shuri deck, whatever. Um, and he only sees play there, and he's good in that deck, obviously, because Sauron removes all of his text, making him just a 1/7 that you can play out with no downside. But he isn't really he's a staple to the deck, but he's not needed for the deck, right? If the deck works well, you can Shuri, Red Skull, Taskmaster, and it's a cool benefit that you can Ebony Maw, but realistically, no one is winning that deck unless they have Shang, and if they have Shang, Ebony Maw isn't swaying the balance really. So I think he's a high B tier. I don't think he's quite the A tier where he's like a near necessity to his deck, like a lot of the A tier cards are. Like they're very strong, very useful in their deck. I don't think Ebony Maw is that. Don't get me wrong, a 1/7 that you get to play on turn 6 in that deck is very good, but the fact that he's only in one deck, he's just so niche, I don't think he should be an A tier card. Electra. Electra's a 1/1 that destroys another 1 drop. She's not very good. You probably really shouldn't use her. You can use her in like a niche scenario where you need a budget Killmonger, I guess, and like early collection before you have Killmonger, even though Killmonger's pool 2. Um, I don't know. So I'm torn on Electra. I think Electra's probably not a very good card, but I think she's probably better than people give her credit for. I think that you could get use out of Electra, right? If they have like a Nebula or something, like on turn 6 you can play Electra and then a 5 drop or something. I think there's probably niche use cases for her that people haven't really utilized her, but overall she's still a niche card that isn't really that strong, so like you probably won't use her in any deck. Forge. Forge is an amazing card. Forge is in a lot of decks. He is extremely strong. As I already stressed, he's in destroy decks very commonly. You also see him in a lot of Surfer decks right now because of Sebastian Shaw and Brood. You don't see this deck as often, but Brood Patriot was a very popular deck specifically because of Forge, because you could forge the Brood to get him to a 3/4, and then it'd be a 3/12 effectively in your lane. Forge is just an extremely strong card that you can add to almost any deck because just adding 2 power to a card is very good, right? Adding 2 card to Black Panther will scale him a lot. Adding 2 power to Deadpool, to Human Torch, any of those doubling effects is extremely strong, so having a card that you can just add 2 power to. Forge is also in every bounce deck because you can just keep reusing the ability, right? Extremely versatile card. I don't think I need to explain anymore. Hawkeye. Hawkeye is either a low A tier or a high B tier. I think I'm going to go with high B tier. He is an extremely strong one drop. He's a 1/4, putting him in a similar position to Ant-Man, one of the highest in the game. The benefit of Hawkeye is in bounce decks, you can keep reusing the ability to get him up to 110 in some cases, or I guess it'd be like a 111, um, or 1/9, 113. But he is extremely strong. He can help you win so many lanes, even not in that case. Like just playing him out, having a 1/4 that the downside is you have to play a card there next turn. It's really not a downside at all. He's an extremely strong card, and I just don't think he's used enough. And you kind of have to like build around him, which is kind of the awkward thing. Like you have to make sure you have curve in your deck to be able to play Hawkeye out and then play into his lane and not ruin your setup the next turn, which I think is a bit of his issue. Um, Ghost is D or F tier. So I just made a deck with Ghost in it. After I made the video, I didn't like Ghost and I replaced it with Quinjet. So Ghost's ability is an ongoing ability, making it one of the few ongoing cards, which is good. The downside is in an ongoing deck where you would use Ghost, or I guess you would use it in like, yeah, I don't know where you would use Ghost. The fact that it always makes you go last in this current sandbox is a detriment more times than not, because if you Ghost and you're playing an Alioth deck, Alioth users just get to kill you and win a lane for free. There's nothing you can do about it because you have Ghost on the board. It's a very bad card, uh, and I think no one uses it so much that it probably won't even get looked at by second dinner because they don't even realize that it's actually just bad into a life. Like it's just terrible. Um, so I would recommend never using that card ever. I learned my lesson. Hood, another amazing card. Hood is a 1/3 that spawns a demon. The demon is a 1/6 with no text box. It's an extremely strong card. You can use him in bounce decks to just keep bouncing him to get multiple demons in your hands. You can play a lot of 1/6s on the final turn. You can use Hood in junk decks to play a 1/3 and then flip the 1/3 over to the other side. It's super easy to just not have the -3 downside because you can just Killmonger or Carnage or Deathlock that lane if you're using him in a destroy deck, and then you have a demon to play. The downside of Hood being a -3 is not really that big of a downside. So the fact that his upside is one demon, if not multiple, if you can keep utilizing him, is insane. Also, if you pair Hood with Bast, he's now a 1/3, and then you get a 1/6 demon later on. He's an extremely strong card. Like I think everyone agrees that this is one of the best one drops in the game, and a fan favorite one drop at that. Um, Human Torch is B tier in my opinion. I There's a lot of move decks in the game, and I don't really think Human Torch is that strong in a lot of them. Like in a pure move deck, you run Human Torch, but I don't think a lot of times in a pure move deck, Human Torch is the best option. With that being said, we now have Kyera in the game, so if you run Kyera in a move deck, Human Torch is safe and you can just blow him up to the moon. So he might more be a low A tier card or a high B tier card. It's hard to say. But generally speaking, He's just very difficult to use. You kind of have to use him in like a mini bounce package with like Falcon, Human Torch, Iron Fist, and uh, Ghost Spider to really utilize the benefits. So I just don't think he's really that good of a card. There's other move cards that are better than he is that you typically use over him, such as Vulture and Dagger, that will move around the board better than he will to get similar power that's safer. Is kind of the biggest issue with Human Torch is he ends up being able to die to Shang and Killmonger, which is an issue. But like I said, Kyara kind of fixes those issues, so that's why I'm thinking he might be a low A tier card now, but I'm gonna leave him at the top of B tier. Um, so Iceman, I'm gonna put Iceman in the A tier. Iceman is just a generically good one drop. He adds one cost to a random card in your opponent's hand. This can hit key cards that is extremely beneficial, extremely disruptive, can ruin the curve that your opponent had going. You can pretty much throw him into any deck that you're like, oh, I just need a one drop, right? Like, cool, I'll just throw in Iceman. That's kind of how he plays. He's not set to a specific deck. Like, you can see him in Bounce, you can see him in Zoo, you can see him kind of everywhere. I think his home, in air quotes, is in Ronin decks because adding one cost will influence your opponent to have more cards in his hand later in the game, which can be beneficial to Ronin. Iron Fist, I'm just now looking and I don't see Ghost Spider in my one drops, so I might have to deal with that later, but that's a later issue. Uh, Iron Fist, I think that it is the worst of the two move your card cards. I think Spider Gwen's better than Iron Fist and does a similar thing. The benefit, I will say, to Iron Fist is Iron Fist is like the only card, one of two move cards, I believe, that let you move your cards into closed locations such as Sanctum Sanctorum, um, or like Luke's Bar. No, not Luke's Bar. Specifically Sanctum Sanctorum. Iron Fist is like one of two, or a flooded location. It's him and Heimdall that can move cards into a location that he himself is not in, which is a very good ability. It's just kind of awkward to set up at times. I mean, it's a similar vein to Human Torch in my mind. He could be a low A tier card. I'm leaving him at the top of B. Um, but moving on, Korg. Hmm. I think there's merit to him being in the B tier and the A tier. I'm gonna put him at the bottom of the A tier. He fits really well into Darkhawk packages. He's a one drop. He's cheap. He's also just a similarly kind of like a good disruption card like Iceman, right? If they pick up a rock, they're not gonna be happy about it. Um, you can also see him. He was a key staple to the Bounce Hawk deck that was going around a couple months ago because he is a one drop that you can pick up, replay a whole bunch, which would allow you to buff like Collector and things like that. I mean, it's just a disruptive, good one drop, not a whole lot to say. Kitty Pryde is an interesting card. At one point in time, she would have been an S tier, no brainer, really. I don't see that as the case in the current metagame. She's kind of on the weaker side. Like, she's not in any decks. I'm going to put her in the middle of the B tier. She has the upside to be an extremely good card. She basically always jukes Killmonger. Like, you're never really worried about a Kitty Pryde into Killmonger unless you somehow have priority. She is extremely good in bounce decks paired with Collector because you don't have to bounce her, right? She goes back into your hand automatically. You can apply a lot of buffs to her. She pairs extremely well with Elsa. The issue is just everything I said isn't very good right now, so in turn, she isn't very good right now. Um, so, I mean, I could see you making the argument for low A tier. I understand that. Um, I just don't think she's very good right now. M'Baku, top of the C tier. M'Baku is not a good card because if you pull him, his ability is dead. Same issue as Angel. Like pretty much the same thing. The difference is in Baku's ability, you don't have to do anything and he will just jump onto the board if he's not in your hand. So you can use him in like Lockjaw to throw Mbaku into Lockjaw, get him back in your deck so that way later on he can jump and fill the board and hopefully win you a lane. The biggest issue with Mbaku is his randomness. He doesn't jump to the board to try and win you the game, he just jumps on the board. So you have a similar Hela-esque issue where he jumps into the location, the only location you were winning when you needed one power and the other two, and it's like, come on, Mbaku. We love you, but just get your act together. He's just not like the randomness isn't very good for him. Whereas Angel, at least Angel goes to where you destroyed the card, so you know exactly where your Angel will be on the board. Is the benefit. Misty Knight, I don't think I can justify putting her any higher than B tier. Misty Knight is a great card. If we are talking about high evolution, I might argue A tier. But that's the thing with Misty Knight that's weird. She's a Patriot card and she's a high evolutionary card. Her Patriot form is a 1/4, like a 1/4 with Patriot active, a 1/6 with Patriot Mystique active. So extremely good card. You can't complain about that. High evolutionary, if you waste an energy, she gives +1 to another card, so she will be like a 2/3, 3/4, which isn't great, but paired with all the other nonsense that High Evo does, it's very good. Um, but like on her own, she isn't really that strong of a card. You don't need her in High Evolutionary, and you don't need her in Patriot. She's just a good card to add in both if you have the space. Another card that falls into that is just a good card to play generally is Nightcrawler. So Nightcrawler is a 1/2 that you get to move one time. So very good in like a self-move deck where you're trying to buff Craven, so you can play Nightcrawler, move him into the Craven lane. Or if you're playing like a Storm deck as well, you can move him into the Flooded later if you need an extra 2 power. He's kind of like a weaker Jeff, right? You can play him and move him into Sanctum Sanctorum to get that 2 power there. He won't outscale Jeff, but it's nice to be able to just like threaten to move him into another lane, even if you don't necessarily want to. He's a generically good card that you can throw in a lot of decks and not feel that bad about having him there. There are just some cards that you would rather have over him. Nova. Nova is a very good card. Nova is seen in almost every single Destroy deck and is seen in almost every single Surfer deck. The reason for him being in every Surfer deck is typically Surfer decks run Killmonger with Sebastian Shaw with Brood. So when you pop Nova, Nova will end up adding like 10 power to the board because you have so many cards on the board, and then it's also hitting Sebastian Shaw. In Destroy decks, it's a similar idea. If you can play Nova before you play Deadpool, Nova will pop, give Deadpool power, then Deadpool will double. Which would then end up scaling into how large your Venom is, how much power your Null has. So it's a very good card. You just like anything that's a 1 more than 5, which Nova almost always is value-wise, is an extremely valuable card. Quicksilver, no, don't use the card. It's just bad. It's actively detrimental. It has the same issues as Ghost. You don't need a 1-drop in the starting hand. You can waste 1 energy, like on turn 1, it doesn't matter. Do not use Quicksilver. If you're a new player to the game, Quicksilver is a bad card. You should not be using him. That's all I'm going to say. Just don't use it. Rocket Raccoon, similar to Hawkeye. He is a 1/4. What's not to like? You can even save him for the final turn where you most likely will know where your opponent's playing cards to like guarantee you hit. The issue is you have to play him into a lane where your opponent played, and then he'll gain 2 power. So if you miss, it would be bad. I think trap people fall into with Rocket Raccoon is you have to not play him on a 1-drop. He's more of a curve filler where like on turn 5 you're like, oh, I'm gonna play a 4-drop and then I'll have 1 energy. I guess I'll play Rocket Raccoon too. Like, that's kind of where he should fall. You don't really want to play him early where your opponent could play literally anywhere. Um, I think he is a good card. The issue is he's just not as good as Hawkeye, like who has the exact same power, and he's not really as good as Ant-Man, who also has the same power. Is the biggest issue. Squirrel Girl is a card. Um, she is a 1/2 that adds squirrels to every location. So the benefit is the squirrels can get into locations like Flooded, Sanctum Sanctorum, Death's Domain, things like that. Um, and then the squirrels can get buffed by Patriot, Khazar, Blue Marvel. It can buff Dazzler. It can help activate Ant-Man. It's just they're only one power, so it's very easy to outscale a Squirrel Girl play. It's just not very good. It's good in its niche, but its niche isn't very good. The other thing is it's good to cheapen death, but Destroy has so many toys at this point that it doesn't really matter. Like they don't need this, right? They can just keep killing Wolverines, X-23s, Deadpools, Novas, and they'll be fine. They don't need the extra help from Squirrel Girl. So that's kind of the issue that she falls into at the moment. Sunspot. On his own, he's a very okay card, but in his decks, he is a very good card. Right, he is in basically every high Evo deck. All of the high Evo decks you will see him in, because when you waste an energy, he'll gain all the energy you wasted, and then Misty Knight will give an energy somewhere, Cyclops will give -1 to 2 cards, Hulk will gain 2 power. So you can see that wasting 1 energy will end up giving you like 6 power worth. So he is a very good card. You can see him get upwards of 10 power, and he's most notably paired with the She-Hulk Infinite deck, where you skip 6 to give Sunspot 6 energy, and then you play Infinite and She-Hulk on the final turn, adding 30 power, and then also Sunspot scaling again. Um, so in that deck, he's extremely strong. He can basically win a lane on his own if you armor him. It's kind of insane. Uh, or just play like Kyera. He is a threat that your opponent has to respect in those lanes, which is probably the only one drop I would say that you have to worry about actually winning you a lane, probably in the game. Titania is an interesting card. Titania is a 1/5, and when you or the opponent play a card in her lane, she switches sides of the board. So she's a 1/5, which is the second best rate on a card, which is amazing. Her downside is pretty bad, but you can use it in some pretty clever ways. She sees the most use in junk decks. You can, on turn 4, play her and then Green Goblin, and the Green Goblin will go over the board. Then Titania will jump over the board, filling 2 of your opponent's lanes. So if you see a location your opponent has where you already played 2 cards, you can do this and likely lock him out. Then all you need to do on turn 6 is to play a card into that lane to pull Titania back over to your side, and you basically ensured a location. You just have to find another one to win. She's also good in Cerebro 5 deck. Cerebro 5 isn't the best Cerebro deck, but it is very good and can put out very high power. Um, and I think she's just a generically good card, not great. She doesn't have really a staple home. You just kind of add her in when you want a cheap thing that you can play on turn 6. That's a 1/5 if you don't have priority to help you sway into your direction, basically. Owatu. He's eh. He lets you see the far right location no matter where he is in your deck, which is very good. Basically, when you put Owatu into your deck, he runs a similar issue to old Chavez. You don't really ever want to see him. You hope he stays in your deck the whole time because you'd rather not actually play him. And when you pull him, it's just kind of like a dead draw. Um, with that being said, his ability also really isn't that useful. Like, unless he shows you like Death's Domain, Sanctum Sanctorum, a lockdown location, like it doesn't really matter, and you probably didn't need to know. Like you would have been fine finding out on turn 3. The information he just gives isn't that good, and you can use him in like some zoo decks or cerebro decks where you would like that info to see like where you can play cards right. Like you could play knowing it's not Nidavellir or Mur Island or something, but otherwise just generally don't use him. Yondu. Yondu is a slot machine. He just destroys the top card of your opponent's deck. So he's used in destroy decks. He's only slightly better than Angel. He's not very good. The benefit is he destroys the top card of your opponent's deck, which means death is one cheaper. He will then add that power to null, which is a blessing and a curse, because if you hit a Hobgoblin, that's -8 power added to your null. If you hit Infinite, that's 20 power added to your null. So he has quite the wide range of power he can give to null. The third thing is he's a one-cost, so you can Killmonger him later, which would then further cheapen death and add power to null. He's just, the randomness typically isn't that good, and him being a one-drop means that he'll die anyway. So, like, generally in a lot of more polished, high collection level decks, you aren't going to see Yondu because he just doesn't really do a whole lot. Zero is an interesting one. I'm going to put him high B tier at the moment. He also is in the Shuri Red Skull decks, and he is a backup plan to Sauron. If you don't pull Sauron, you can always zero Red Skull and then Taskmaster it later, or you could zero Ebony Maw. He's a very good enabler for all those cards. Zero is basically like a backup plan to if you don't pull Sauron or Shuri really. And his benefit is you can also then play him on turn 6 with Taskmaster if you didn't pull Sauron, so you can add 3 extra power. Him being above rate is also very good. Zero specifically, I remember when I was low collection level, is an extremely good card. Being able to use him in those Red Skull decks is super good early on because a lot of cards can't scale that high, and 3 power can make a difference. Higher up, he's not as good, which is why I just put him in the B tier. But I think he's a very good one drop, and can be used in other decks where you want to just get rid of a quick ability, like on Lizard or something, where that's like you're running a 0 Lizard, Typhoid Mary, Enchantress package. You can do that with Zero and use him in other shells. It's just not common. Howard the Duck. Yeah, he's not very good. Probably don't use him. He just shows you the next card that you're going to draw. So, like, the thought is you pair him with Iron Lad and America Chavez. Reality, he's not really that good. The benefit is he's an ongoing card. So if you want a one drop for an ongoing deck and you aren't using Ant-Man, Howard the Duck would be the most beneficial ongoing ability that you could add to your deck. But really, you aren't going to use Howard very often, and he's generally not very good. So I would just say avoid him and don't really play him unless you're trying to have fun, which, you do you. Nebula. I would say that Nebula is the best one drop in the game. She is a 1/1 that gains 2 power whenever your opponent doesn't play a card at this location, which means if you play her on turn 1 and then your opponent plays there on 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, she'll still be, or 2, 3, 4, 5, she'll still be a 1/3 by the end of the game. But that also assumes that your opponent filled the location. Typically, your opponent isn't able to fill that location, or it would be too disruptive for them to not play where they want to. So Nebula will typically end up being like a 1/5 in most games, which is extremely good. It also puts a lot of pressure on your opponent to play into the Nebula lane. So she's just a very good card, a very disruptive card. Can also win you a game similar to Sunspot, where if your opponent just doesn't play into that lane, she grows insanely. And then, not to count that she pairs super well with Lockdown. If you Professor X her or Storm her location, your opponents can't play into that lane outside of Jeff, which means that she will scale freely. The only thing you have to watch out for is Killmonger. Spider Ham. Back in the day, Spider Ham would have been an S tier card. That is not the case anymore. He is like, eh. He's, in my opinion, a worse Iceman. So he hits the leftmost card in your hand, which in theory would be a high cost card. But if you play him too early, it's just kind of a random card that you're hitting. The issue is that you can't really do anything. Like a lot of times he's used in bounce decks or disruptive decks that like want to use his ability multiple times, and you can't because a lot of the times your opponent isn't playing a pig out because why would they play a pig? Right? It doesn't really benefit them. The major issue you're seeing with Spider Ham is a lot of the decks right now run detrimental cards, so cards with bad abilities such as Red Skull, Typhoid Mary, Infinite, and if Spider Ham hits those cards, it ends up being a benefit to your opponent. So you don't end up wanting to do that. So just for the current metagame, it's not very good for Spider Ham, and also his ability getting nerfed makes him kind of weaker. He's still usable. He's still a good disruptor card. It's a similar effect to Iceman. I would just say it's kind of a worse Iceman, and he has less power. Echo, man, I think Echo is amazing. I don't have Echo, but Echo is an extremely valuable card, specifically in this current metagame. She removes the ongoing effect from any card your opponent plays in her path. So what that means is you basically every turn you just echo mid, or every game you echo middle, because that means your opponents cannot Miss Marvel middle, they cannot Professor X middle, they can't do anything they want middle with an ongoing card, which if you're playing a Miss Marvel deck, can just completely shut them down. And it's not a symmetrical effect, so that means if you're running Miss Marvel, you can echo middle and then Miss Marvel setup, and that basically completely shuts out any game plan they had with ongoing cards. Uh, it's also extremely useful in most Thanos tech decks that are using Professor X themselves. It helps them in mirror matches where you want to make sure that your opponent isn't Professor Xing on 5 to a specific lane so you can build up elsewhere. She's a super good tech card, and I'm surprised that we're not seeing more of her. I think she's an amazing card. X23. X23 is going right in the middle of all the destroy one drops in the A tier. Uh, when she is destroyed or discarded, give +1 max energy to you next turn. So, and then it regenerates at another location. So it'll never get taken off the board. You can Killmonger it, kill it as many times as you want. So it's very good for Venom, very good for Null, very good for Death. And the big thing this does is in Deadpool decks, it allows you to play Null and Deadpool in the final turn, which means a lot of the time you're playing out like literally 100 power on the final turn, and that's completely unreactable. Giving max energy is extremely valuable. So the fact that she does it at a fairly low opportunity cost is what makes her so strong. Nico Minoru. She is an S tier card. She's either S tier or high A tier. I would put her in S tier. I'd probably put her right there. She is maybe the most versatile one drop in the game. She has 6 different spells, all of which are beneficial, all of which you see played out like whenever, and you see Nico in like every single deck in the game. She's in Destroy. She's in Bounce. She's in Darkhawk for some reason. She is everywhere. You like if you're like, oh, I need a one drop, just throw Nico in. Probably half the spells will benefit you at any given time. Like she is just a crazy versatile card that just always gets value. It's kind of insane, and I think she's gonna get a Jeff effect where you never really see her get touched, but she's just always going to be good. Black Knight. I just made a deck about him, and I think he is a very good card. I think the buff to the Ebony Blade is insane. The fact that the Ebony Blade can't have its power reduced and can't be destroyed puts it in the ability to be played to so many locations where discard typically can't be played. Um, On top of that, it pairs well with Ghost Rider. The blade counts as a 4-drop, which means you can Zabu and then play Ghost Rider and the blade on the final turn to play like upwards of what, like 43 power or something. It's absolutely insane. Uh, the Black Knight is a very strong discard card, and it's like the best discard deck currently. Obviously, you're not going to see him outside of that one niche shell, but he is so good in that niche shell that he is basically dominating the archetype. Martyr. Yeah, I think Martyr deserves to go right next to Titania. Martyr is a 1/5, contrary to what the card would say. Um, Her detrimental ability, though, is that she will try to lose you the game whenever possible. Or at the end of the game. She'll try to lose you. It's the opposite of Captain Marvel. So basically, you want to play her in a flood style deck to lock her into where she is. Like, you don't want to give her the opportunity to leave. Um, the biggest issue with Martyr is if Fisk Tower appears, where if a card moves here, destroy it, because she will just kill herself every time. Um, the best thing that I've seen with Martyr that you can do is you can play Martyr on 1 and then play Adam Warlock on 2, and basically it ensures a card draw from Adam Warlock, which can be really good. But actually, I'm gonna lower her. But overall, she's like kinda niche. She's better than the tier cards, but like she's not super great. She's just kinda good. Celine is the last card until I go and find where Ghost Spider is. And she is somewhere around here. I'm going to put her in the top of the B tier. I think Celine is a very strong card for Junk. The issue is just she can be kind of awkward. You can get games where you don't really ever play her and she's just kind of a dead draw because you don't want her to hit your things. Um, that being said, obviously her applying -3 to your opponent can be super disruptive, right? Like I've said, it can hit Iron Man, it can hit Professor X, it can hit Deadpool, it can hit Human Torch, it can hit a lot of cards that would be like Brood and just completely shut them down. Because then they'd be negative power, which would be super bad paired with their ability. Um, but it's also random, and you don't really need her to win. She's good as an option, but not a necessity, which I think is like a good spot for her in the B tier. You don't need her, but she can help in the deck. So give me a second to see if I can find Ghost Spider. Okay, I could not find Ghost Spider. We're gonna pretend Miles Morales is Ghost Spider, and I think Ghost Spider is the better version of Iron Fist in my opinion. Um, so she moves a card to her location. I think that is a better and easier to use ability. The issue with Iron Fist is you have to play him out preemptively, where Ghost Spider is a reaction. It pulls the last card you played to her, as opposed to moving the next card you played, which I think makes a big difference. I think it's a lot easier to use Ghost Spider, and I think Ghost Spider has seen niches in a lot of non-move decks for just being good at moving the card that you want to move out of the way, right? Like you see your opponent played a big card into the lane that you also played a big card. Cool, let me just Ghost Spider it out and we reset. Like specifically, there was a Ghost Spider Doc Ock strategy where you would Doc Ock a lane, Ghost Spider it out, and then play another 5-drop to win the other lane that you didn't Ghost Spider in. She's a very versatile card, and I think she's the better of the two move cards. I'm putting her in A because I think she is just that versatile, and she's also really good in her niche. Anyway, that is the whole tier list. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, please leave a like and comment letting me know your thoughts of the matter, and subscribe for any future videos that I make. Specifically, I believe Hercules is coming out tomorrow, might be Grandmaster, for that deck highlight. Anyway, I will see you guys.